All right, with that, I will turn it over to our presenter, Anne.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I really appreciate your time. So I am going to try to get through things very quickly, and you can go back and watch the recording and look at the slides as needed. But I just wanted to point out that in this photo, this is a special education teacher working on some academic goals with a student who is using her talker. So if you don't remember anything from today, I want you to take away that you can write goals that will actually be worked on by other team members, and they can collect the data for you because that could save a lot of time. And I just want to review that this is kind of like an extension of what we talked about at the end of my last webinar, which was technically speaking. And so I have the links to the regular YouTube video of that or the registration links. You can get one ASHA CEU for watching that. And then the first one I did, which is kind of like a prerequisite to all of this, is reverse the curse. So I have the links there for you too as well. My financial disclosures, I'm not going to read through. I have confidence in all of your reading comprehension skills. And you probably already know the objectives. We're going to talk about writing goals, challenges to writing goals, ways to improve existing goals, and characteristics of high quality goals. A little disclaimer at the end of this session, unfortunately, you will not be able to feel bad about what you've done in the past. You will not be able to change your practice without talking to your teams and your administrators. And unfortunately, you won't be able to count on things staying the same, being agreed upon by everyone, or knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're doing it right. I know that as SLPs, we all want to do things the right way and be correct. But unfortunately, there is a little bit of an art to writing communication goals and objectives. So everybody's going to have their own style. So with that, I need to collect some grant data. Who are you? These are the different categories. So Jim's going to go ahead and launch the poll so I can collect that data. Oh, it's the other one.
Yep, sorry, I just realized that.
Thank you. While you're all finishing that, I do want to share that I was in a public school last year, 2 days a week, with a pretty large caseload for 2 days, and I had 3 different students using talkers on my caseload, and I had to write IEP goals and objectives for them after inheriting goals and objectives. So I'm going to be speaking from that experience. Okay, it looks like we have over 80% participation. I think that's great. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Thank you. All right, so challenge number 1, who are they? They being your student with complex communication needs who's likely using a high-tech AAC device. This is a quote from a great resource called Writing IEP Objectives and Goals for Authentic Communication for Children Who Have CCN by Linda Burkhart and Gil Porter. And they say that for many children who have CCN, it's impossible to do a one-time assessment and learn enough about the child to write meaningful goals and objectives. So the part I've highlighted here, school systems often don't recognize this process and expect the team to be able to assess and write goals over the short term. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but if you want to use this resource to be able to advocate to your administrators how it is so different for these students, they go on to say that the result of doing such a quick, cursory initial assessment is that it results in narrow, task-specific, meaningless goals that are not flexible enough to follow the child's evolving learning requirements. Therefore, initial goals may need to be written in a manner that allows for exploration of a range of strategies to determine the most appropriate learning requirements for each child. So with that, they also include in that resource, which I have linked, anything that you see underlined is a link to either a web page or PDF that you should be able to access. They give you some examples, and I want to make sure you understand that these are just examples and they would definitely need to be customized for your individual students. But the way that they're suggesting to do it is saying something like, the child will use 3 of the following developmentally relevant communicative functions expressively. And then go on to list the communicative functions, for example, request objects, request direct actions, so on and so forth. So as you can see, this is very open to the child doing a lot of different things and still being able to demonstrate learning and progress. Oops, something's happening. Okay, sorry. Another example is that they'll show increasing interest and attention to someone using a comprehensive aided communication system, such as POD, to talk to him or her in natural context throughout the day. So the data point is actually the increased attention to someone else modeling the AAC. And so then they go on to define what that attention looks like. So it'll be observed as an increase in looking towards the communication symbols or the communication partner, calming during this process, looking away to the side, but with a stillness as if listening, or responding to the partner's message. And then they say you should even go on to define what that specifically looks like for the child. And then to quantify it, it would be like a minimum of 10 times during the school day in a variety of contexts. So as you can see, these types of goals are a lot different from the goals we're used to writing for other kids, that this leaves it open to even somebody with very emerging interest in the AAC device. You can still demonstrate progress with that interest. Obviously, with the first one, if you're listing a lot of different communicative functions, you're making it more flexible, but you're also creating more data points for yourself. So there has to be a balance there. But in the article by Linda and Gail, they do also include some suggestions on how to collect data with some data graphs and charts too. So talking about interest, when you pull out your coolest toy to elicit a request and you get no response, sometimes that is very disheartening because you feel like you can't get the student to engage with you. But we want to remember that the goal should not be for them to say what we want them to say. So maybe what we think is cool is not cool to the student. So these are some more tips from Linda Burkhart, which I would consider Linda an expert. I saw her speak at ATIA a couple months ago, and she said that this is her 50th year in the field of AAC. So I don't consider myself an expert. I'm learning, but I do consider Linda an expert. So she goes on to say, usually typical kids' first words are not things like more, done, and help. They're whatever is meaningful to that child. So think of your own child or your nieces and nephews. First words are usually like dog or dad or something that they have a meaningful connection to. It's not always a core word. So we want to think about that with our students who use AAC as well. We need to model what they are thinking about, not just what we had planned for our session. We need to model to connect, not to direct. I've also seen out in the world of social media, model to connect, not to correct, which is another great way to put it. We need to have immersive language models, not corrective language models. We need to kind of follow the student's lead. Whatever the child says is correct, make something of it, go with it. And then immersive, like she says, because it's not realistic or efficient to model everything we say to create a full immersion in AAC, but we want to at least try to do an immersive like environment. and models must be genuine, meaningful, and emotional. The emotionless modeling is harder to remember, harder for the student to learn from because it's not making a big impact on them. So we need to model language that they have an emotional connection to. And as soon as you want the child to copy your model, you're crossing the line. And what she means by that is you're getting back to it's your agenda that matters. You know what the right answer is, and that the student has to follow your lead. And that's really not autonomous communication. So to get back to some examples of goals from Linda and Gail, one is just that they'll generate 3 to 4 word sentences using their communication book. So we're going to focus on the generate 3 to 4 word sentences here. And they give some great examples of how to create objectives for that goal. If we think of objectives as benchmarks that happen in sequence, little by little, getting towards the overarching goal, then number 1, the step would be to just complete a multi-word sentence. And they say using POD or other multiple modalities. When provided with models and visual supports of sentence starters. So if the sentence starter is I like, maybe you have a visual support of the I like, then the student is expected to just say anything to finish that sentence. And so I like is a good example because there is no wrong answer, right? If we said I see and they said go, then you might look at them like, well, that doesn't make any sense. So we want to pick sentence starters that really are open to the learner saying anything and it being okay. And we're praising them for it. And they're getting that emotional response to make it meaningful. So after they're doing that, then the next objective would be to produce a 2-word sentence when provided with the verbal cue, tell me more, during genuine interactions. Kristen raised her hand. I think we're going to wait till the end for questions, if that's okay. After they're doing the 2-word sentence with the cue, then number 3, they're going to do the 2-word sentence spontaneously. Number 4, then they're going to do a 3-word sentence with the cue, tell me more. And number 5, they're going to do the 3-word sentence spontaneously. So you can see how the level of support changes in order to get them to the goal of 3 to 4 word sentences, and also the actual skill changes. So going from just finishing a sentence to 2 words to 3 words. And remember my disclaimer that you shouldn't just use these like a goal bank. You should definitely tailor them to your individual student. But I noticed in that goal that they said using a communication book. So I wanted to point out that's one style of doing it, being very specific about the tool. But a lot of times I recommend that SLPs be a little more flexible in how the student meets the goal. So if we say something like using total communication, then we're implying that they can use speech, they can use their SGD. By ASL for international attendees, that's American Sign Language. And some people even want to include conventional or universal gestures because waving and nodding your head to say yes are things that would meet the goal. So it's kind of like you need to pick out what counts. When the student does it, is it going to count towards the data being collected that they met their goal? If it's only that they're supposed to use their communication book or they're supposed to use their SGD, then them learning to say the word with oral speech would actually not look like progress, which is silly. So we definitely always want to include speech as another way to meet our goal. So we need to be specific about how to measure progress while also giving the student the autonomy to say anything. So that's where we get into this kind of juxtaposition of when we write a SMART goal, we have to be specific and narrow. But as Linda and Gail point out, we don't want to be so narrow that it's meaningless and not flexible to follow the child's evolving skills. So I've kind of highlighted here how the specific part can be tricky because we need it to be narrow, but we don't want it to be narrow for the student's response. Achievable is also very tricky because it's really hard to make sure that you can reasonably accomplish something when you don't know the student very well. And also the time-based part about being realistic but ambitious. So when you're setting your objectives, the short-term benchmarks, and you need to say when you're going to consider that one to be done, maybe by the first progress note, and then the second one done by the second progress note, that's really hard to predict as well. That's where it's pretty stressful being an SLP. Who says being an SLP is stressful? I'm 39 and I feel great. It is pretty hard to make those judgment calls, especially for these learners with complex communication needs who you haven't had enough time to get to know. But the ones that I think are very doable are the measurable and the relevant. So let's talk more about those. The first challenge to those are collecting baseline data. So at this point, I'm going to collect some baseline data as an illustration. Jim is going to launch the poll. And these are actually your questions that you're going to be tested on at the end of this session. So I'm going to ask you first up front to answer them and get a baseline. Okay, we have over 80% participation. That's awesome. I'm just looking. Number one, the majority is correct. That's true. Number two, I love that we have like a 50-50 split because this one is very much left up to opinion. But we're going to talk about why my opinion is that we should not have operational goals, but we can have operational objectives. We'll get to that. Number three, I love that 99% said true. That's correct. Number four, we're getting there because we've got 86% saying true. It is true, but I know that's really hard for us to wrap our heads around. And number five is interesting. I would have thought that one would have been more obvious, that you have to be aware of a problem before you can fix a problem, but a lot of people are saying you can just fix the problem. So that's interesting. So we're going to go ahead and end the poll. And let's talk more about this. So the problem of collecting baseline data, there is a solution. There's lots actually of AAC specific data collection tools. These are just a few of the better known ones that a lot of people I know have used and have said that they like. So I want to highlight them. So they each have their own slide. Like I said, things that are underlined are going to take you to either a website or a PDF with more information. But Realize Language is a data collection tool that is only $10 per year, and you could do a 30-day free trial. It only works for LAMP Words for Life and TouchChat because they're the software created by PRC Saltillo. But it basically records every button that's pushed, even like the top message display bar, and sends it all to a website where then all that data is organized in different ways. So it could tell you, like, by part of speech, how many nouns, how many verbs, how many question words, and you can do it in a time frame. So you could say in the last 6 months, or you could just say in the last 6 days. The frequency of certain words. So you can look at a list, and it'll start with the words that are used most frequently to least frequent, but it has an entire list for whatever time frame you want. So you could see that they really love to talk about T-Rex. And everything is timestamped, so you can look at it in kind of like a calendar view and see when it's being used, which is very helpful. And also you can search when you're in that calendar view, you can search a word. So maybe on the frequency list, you saw they love talking about T-Rex, dinosaurs, but they only said help 3 times. So now you go into the calendar and you search the word help, and you can see when the word help was used. And you could also see the context because it'll give you a running list of everything that was said before and after the word that you're searching. So maybe the context makes sense, maybe it doesn't. It's available in the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, and Ireland, which is awesome. And then this is just an example for those 2 apps, but other apps have their own built-in data logging for each button activation. Some even have a way to differentiate between what the learner activated versus what someone else modeled. I think Tobii Dynavox software does that. There's a certain setting so that when the person who's modeling touches a button, they have to tap it twice, and then that data gets recorded as the child didn't do it. So that's really helpful, which that's not part of realized language. So you don't know in realized language whether it was the student or somebody else, but you could just tell the team, like, for a certain period of time, like maybe like on Friday, don't model at all, so they can just see the data from what the student is doing to get like a snapshot of data. So then if you're able to collect 100 utterances, you can kind of do a language sample, which you could calculate the MLU. And I have a great resource here about how to do MLU if you're not familiar. And then there's another resource called the Quad Profile, and it's basically 4 different checklists of how to categorize all the different things that were in the language sample so that you can analyze the language sample in some really nice ways to quantify what they're doing and help you set some new targets for what they're not doing for your goals and objectives. The second one is called the AAC Profile by Tracy Kovac, and it's actually published by ProEd. So if you're ordering other stuff on ProEd, you might as well throw this into the order. It's $84. It's a print manual, like a booklet, and then you get 15 protocols. And you could even, now I didn't realize you can get the electronic manual for less. And it's rating scales, observational rating scales in the 4 different communicative competencies, which are pretty widely known nowadays in the AAC field, but in case you're not sure, for our operational, linguistic, social, and strategic. So that's where one of the baseline questions was about operational skills. And on the next slide, I'll go into detail about each one. But basically for the AAC profile, you would need to have time to observe the student. So I would recommend that you interview the parent and interview the one-to-one educator that's with the student all the time and ask them what they think about each item. Do you think they can do this? Do you think they can do this? And what you do is you rate them on whether they're doing it independently with no support, which is a 3. You rate them as doing it sometimes with some support, which is a 2, or not at all, even with max support, which is a 1. And then each section you total and you figure out where like the cutoff is for the skill level for the student, and you pick some of those skills to be your target. So the ones that are already emerging, which are like a 2, would be your targets. And they say you could use some ones as well, but I like to build on strengths. So things that the student is already showing a little bit of doing with some help. I think that would be the best place to start. So that was one of your baseline questions. Work on skills that are emerging. And the thing that sets this one apart from all the other data collection tools are they even have skills for the communication partner. So there's a lot for each section. There's questions about like what the parent is doing or what the pair is doing, what the communication partner is doing, basically, to set the student up for success. So you can actually rate how everybody else is doing and then kind of figure out where they need to get better about being a communication partner, which definitely influences the skills of your student. Okay, so to get into the 4 main competencies better, there's somebody actually came up with a 5th one, and then somebody came up with a 6th one. So I just want you to have like a comprehensive list. So this link takes you to the list of 5, and they define each one pretty succinctly. So operational is stuff like powering the device on and off, navigating, adjusting the volume. Social is initiating, maintaining, terminating in a socially, culturally, and contextually appropriate way, communicating your intent, and they include repairing communication breakdown in social, but I put that in red because they bring it down to the strategic, which is where everybody else puts it too. But I just want to point that out that like different researchers have different opinions about this stuff. So if you don't know what the right answer is, that's okay, because these researchers don't even agree. Number 3, linguistic is what like we all feel comfortable with, which is like expanding utterances, using grammar, syntax. So I feel like parts of speech, those are the things that we can wrap our heads around for sure. Number 4, strategic is really important, and this is a little outside the box. So these are special skills that are unique to AAC-based communication, such as the ability to gain the listener's attention prior to selecting a symbol, checking for partner comprehension, how many of our students do that, and repairing communication breakdowns. So they do list that identifying the communication breakdown is a separate skill. And then lastly, knowing which AAC system to use in a given situation. That gets back to our, if they're a total communicator, they have all these tools in their toolbox, but which one do I need right now? And that takes a lot of social skill, I feel like, in addition to strategic skill. And then they added the 5th one, they call it emotional, the development of an emotional vocabulary and utilizing that vocabulary to relay feelings, beliefs, and thoughts. And you have to be aware of those emotions first before you can express them. And these are like complex emotions like empathy, self-regulation, and self-efficacy. So these are like really deep in the 5th category. And then lastly, the 6th category, Kate Ahern has a really great webpage all about this. She calls this category self-advocacy, and that's things like asking to stop, take a break, report abuse and neglect. So I think it does wrap into the emotional category because you need to be aware of your feelings before you could then report that something bad is happening to you, right? You need to know that that's something bad. So number 5 and number 6, I can see why they're kind of like extra because they're really high level, but for some students, they're very applicable and they should not be overlooked. The next data collection tool for taking baseline data on students with AAC is the Communication Matrix by Charity Rowland. And this one is also an observational rating scale, but it's like a portal on a website. So it takes you through one skill at a time, and it explains really clearly what the skill is with descriptions of like case examples, even some videos of students doing the skill so that you could say, yes, my student does that, or no, my student doesn't. And this is the tool I would say that is the best for like really early learners with really complex needs. Like maybe there's visual impairment, there's hearing impairment, there's mobility impairments. There's a lot going on. This one I feel like really starts at the basics and walks you through very clearly. This one is free with an email sign up, but you can only save the results for 5 students, and then you'd have to pay for additional ability to save. But you can go through it and get to the end, and it'll tell you where your student falls and what the skills they've already mastered are and what the skills they still need to work on, so you can write your goals and objectives off. It just won't let you save it. That's called the try me function when you're not saving it. And then there's also a community forum where people are sharing ideas, kind of like a Facebook group, but just on a website, and that's also free. And I didn't realize that they have a PDF version available, so you can print it out. And I thought it was really cool. They have a separate one for parents, so it kind of phrases things differently from the one that you would be doing as SLP. And they even have a Spanish parent version in PDF. So they're only $5. I thought that was really cool that they were thinking about how to word things differently so parents could report on skill level. And then Spanish, I feel like we need more and more. So there's also a training webinar that you could get an ASHA CEU for on how to use the communication matrix. That's only $50. You have the link there for that as well. Okay, and now this is the one I hear from people all the time. Have you used the DAG? Have you heard of the DAG? Everybody loves the DAG. This is a 3rd version, the DAG 3 Dynamic AAC Goals Grid. It's from Tobii Dynavox, but it is research-based. So it's free with email sign-up, which is amazing. It's a similar grid to the AAC profile. So it's got the 4 communicative competency areas: operational, linguistic, social, and strategic. And what you do is you rate each skill, which they're calling each skill a goal. You rate it as mastered or in progress or not applicable. And then depending on the percent that you've rated as mastered, you put that up on the top page, and it'll put your learner into a certain category, which there's 5 different categories called communication ability levels: emergent, transitional, context dependent, transitional, independent, and independent. So you've probably heard of these terms, probably like emergent or context dependent is very common, but they really break it down into a lot of different skills for each one. And then you can kind of describe your student in a certain category and see them moving up through the categories over time, which is really cool. There's a very, very detailed how to, let me remember what this is. Yeah, it's a PDF. So it's a written how-to guide for how to use the DAG. Sorry, now you get back. Okay. So for you out there who want to have things very black and white, I feel like you would gravitate towards the DAG. Like, there's no question of how to do it, and it's free, which is so cool. So it'd be worth checking out. But I want you to be aware that for each of those, what they call goals, or what I would call skills, they're not only asking you if it's mastered or in progress, but they're giving you some levels of cueing. They call it a chain of cues. And you're supposed to rate whether it's mastered with this cue or that cue. And one of their cues, called indirect cue, is to gesture toward the communication device and wait expectantly, which I would define as a prompt. Because if you're gesturing towards the device, you're telling them you have to use the device. You're not telling them they can use their speech or they can use sign language or whatever else. So you're putting that demand on them that they have to use the device. And then waiting expectantly is another way to put pressure on a student and make them feel like they have to do something. So if you're checking off that the skill is mastered with that indirect cue, as they call it, I would not consider that mastered. I'd recommend that you only consider it mastered if they're doing it independently. So I hope that makes sense. as you're filling that out, I might even just ignore their chain of cues and just rate them as mastered or not mastered to make it simple. Because if it's mastered but with help, then is it really mastered? I guess that's my big hang up on that. But there's more about the DAG-free, lots more. So beyond you collecting your baseline data, each skill in the grid, which is labeled as a goal, but it's not a SMART format, it's very general the way it's listed. Each one of those has an activity underneath it. So there's a link right in the checklist that you're filling out. There's a link to an activity, which takes you to a multi-page handout consisting of a lesson plan, which includes the goal at the top. It includes preparation notes for doing your session, a materials list for your session, tips for success, which some of them even have a link to a video, which I'll show you in a second, activity with steps, supplemental activities, and suggestions for how to measure progress, all for that one skill. And then the last page of the handout is a template for you to send a letter home to the parent to explain the skill and what you're doing with the skill and to give some custom suggestions. It has like blank lines at the bottom for you to suggest what the parent do to work on the skill. So that is like an amazing resource. And I just want to show you the video real quick because these are really good videos. Let me make sure that this is going to work. Hold on. All right, let me know if you can see this and hear this. Jim, can you confirm that you could hear that?
Cannot hear it. No.
All right, I might not show this then, but you can all click on it in the handouts. It's a really great video of a woman working with a student. Obviously they're at a house, but a child with an AAC device and then a typical child, and she's modeling in a great way, and she's working with both of them and making it really fun. So I just think it's a great video for all of us to see, especially like a parent, to think about how to do modeling at home during like a cooking activity. All right, so let me go back and share. Let me try it one more time. Did you hear it that time?
No, still no
Okay,
sound.
sorry. I'll move on. Okay, so can you see my slides again?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I just gave you a link to the very first skill, which is under linguistic, emergent, and then the skill is called making selections. So this is the link to go to that activity packet that has all that stuff that I just told you, just so you could see an example. But like I said, they literally have an activity packet for every single skill in the DAG, which is really great. And this is just an example of the goal for that skill. They are calling this a goal. Select any message or word given a communication page during an interaction with or without intent. So you would need to reword that, but that's good because we don't want to think of this as like a goal bank that we're just grabbing goals from. But you could see that it's, again, selects any message or word given any communication page during any interaction. And then the with or without intent part blows most SLPs' minds because they're like, if they don't have intent, they're not even ready to use AAC. That's not true. The basic skills at the beginning are really just to pay attention and engage with it. And there is no wrong answer. So that's what's really hard for us to wrap our heads around. But this could literally be a goal for one of your students. Any message, any communication page, with or without intent. And you're just keeping a frequency count on that, which kind of like blows people's minds, but you can do that. Okay, moving on. This is my last slide about the DAG. I don't want to put it to death, but this is another way to get to all those activities. So this is a link to their webpage that's just for all the activities, all organized by communication competency. Once you click on one of those, it opens up to your communication ability level. And once you open up one of those, it opens up to each of the activity handouts for each of the skills. So you could see under emergent for linguistic, there's 3 different skills. That's the smallest amount. Some of these have like 12. Some of them have 8. It just depends, but there's a lot of content here. So, and it's free. So I would definitely encourage you to check out the DAG 3 if you haven't already. So now that you've got tons and tons of baseline data, how do you pick out what to work on? How do you prioritize? And the question really is, does it matter? So Lauren Enders, who I love, compiled a checklist based on the work of Linda Burkhart and Gail Porter, who we already talked about, and Carol Zangari, who's awesome. So all of these experts have come up with like questions to help you prioritize what to work on. And Lauren put them all together in a beautiful handout of yes/no questions. So I'm not going to read through it, but click on this link to get to it. And the 2 that I really wanted to highlight are, will accomplishing the goal lead to autonomous communication? So if you're looking at the goals you have now for your students with talkers, and when you ask yourself that question, will it lead to autonomous communication? Like say anything to anyone at any time in any place. You're probably going to find a lot of the goals you have now don't really help with that. And that's okay. I don't want you to feel ashamed of that. I just want you to be aware of that so that at your next opportunity to update your goals, you can really try to think of goals that will lead to autonomous communication. And the other one that I really liked was, does the goal address skills that make the communicator happier or more independent? I think a lot of times we don't really think about that, or we don't know what makes a student happy because we don't know them very well. But thinking about what makes them more independent, I think that is so key because we have to think long term. So we want them to be able to talk to a peer, able to repair a breakdown with a nurse, like really functional and really helping them to do things without an adult acting as an interpreter. That's really key. Consideration number 2, will it impact other skills? So this came back to, how are we picking which skill to work on next? Because you can't do it all. Are any of the skills similar to the ones that are being targeted in other goal areas on the IEP, such as academic or social emotional? Because if they are, you're going to get way more bang for your buck because that other professional is going to be working on it too. Maybe the social worker, the school psychologist, the special education teacher. This will naturally increase the practice with variety, which is a key to learning. And it'll also ensure generalization across communication partners and contexts because they're doing it in the resource room. They're doing it in the gen ed classroom. They're not just doing it with you and just during speech time. So those are definitely skills that you want to pick as well. And then the consideration number 3 is Common Core state standards, which I went down quite a rabbit hole with this one. But there are some relevant pieces from the speaking and listening section and from the language section. So if you could find a skill, like for example, in the language domain for kindergarten, in conventions of English, I found a skill called use the most frequently occurring prepositions: to, from, in, out, on, off, for, of, by, with. That's not too high level that you couldn't possibly relate it to your student who's using AAC. I know a lot of these skills are like so far of a stretch to make your student who's using a talker fit in with them, but there are some, especially in the kindergarten section, if you look through. So I gave you a link to the Common Core state standards so you could look through and just think about, you're not required to have your communication goals linked to a state standard, but I think it's good to be aware of when they might overlap, because that's, again, going to get you more bang for your buck. And so the listening and speaking are on page 23 of this document, a 60-page document. Language skills are on page 26. Consideration number 4, other communication guides. So we've got some other credible frames of reference from ASHA. I'm giving you the MLU resource again. Brown's stages, which everybody remembers from grad school, but we want to make sure we're referring to them. So again, you're collecting your data with one of those tools we talked about earlier, and you're looking at what the skills are that are next steps and what they need to do. And now you're thinking about what might be developmentally appropriate for them based on their age, their developmental level, and their other abilities and needs. So just some other resources for you to pull from. Okay, a little bit of comic relief. That feeling when you withhold bubbles from a preschooler until he signs more. I just want to remind everybody that this is compliance, not connection. So if you're withholding stuff because it elicits a request, that's easier for us to do as the adult, but it's actually like killing your rapport with your student. Like, you're not doing yourself any favors by withholding things and making it seem like you're at odds with the student, because communication should really be about connection and about making memories together and having positive emotions. So I just want to remind you that there's more and more out there on social media and in the field about not making students comply. And I definitely want to make sure that everybody understands what that means. Okay, consideration number 5, symbol support. So if your user uses a symbol-based app and you're on a page with, let's say, clothing, and you're asking, how should we dress the snowman today? That's a great activity because the student could say anything, right? But if you're asking the student to label a photo of a shoe and label a photo of a shirt, they're really just matching the photo to the symbol in their talker. So it's non-identical matching, which it might be a skill that they're supposed to be working on, but it's really not labeling. So I want to make sure that you know what you're measuring. And you just need to think to yourself, what does the student need to do? If they need to navigate to a folder to label it, then they're demonstrating that they understand categories, right? Because they had to go to the right folder. But once they're in the folder and they can see the symbols and compare it to the actual item that you're actually asking them to label, then they only need to do that matching task. I have a video to kind of illustrate this. Hopefully it works. Okay. See if you can hear this one. Tim, can you hear that one?
No, I can't hear that one either.
That's weird. All right, well, basically, you'll see what's happening. So she's holding up a coin, and the student is labeling it on her talker. She says, we're working on nickel today. So that's her, like, warm up. What is this? She uses her talker to say penny. What is this? She's pausing. Nickel. She got it right. What's this one? She says quarter. She got it right. How about this one? Nickel. You get the idea. So she's only working on nickel, but the teacher is embedding it with all the other coins, which she has already mastered. So she's only taking data on nickel, which is coming up like every 3 or every 4 times. But Again, this is a special education teacher. This is not an SLP. The goal is labeling coins, which, I had to tell her, this is a great activity. I love that you're doing it. So the student is using their talker with you. It's very natural, but you're not really measuring labeling. You're doing a non-identical matching activity. So just illustrating that. But I love that this special education teacher is collaborating with the SLP and making sure that during her academic work, she's incorporating use of the talker because it just makes sense. So I want to encourage you to collaborate more and make sure that that's what's happening with your students for their academic skills as well. Okay, consideration number 6, the rule of 8. So I don't know about you guys, but in Connecticut, it's becoming a standard recommendation that we have at least 8 data points in order to report on progress. So if you do the math for your student's service time, possibly divided by group instruction, divided by the number of targets you need 8 data points for, you might be setting yourself up for failure in being able to accurately report progress because you have too many targets. So for example, I told you I had a caseload last year. So there was a lot of IEPs I inherited that had a lot of objectives with multiple targets within an objective. And so, for example, I had one student who I saw twice a week for 30 minutes. He had 9 different targets that I had to take data on. And he was scheduled in a group of 3, which means he only got to answer me a third of the time. So I immediately switched him into a dyad with him and one other student. But even still, with all the absences and all the interruptions and the meetings, I really could not possibly measure and take enough data to show that I had 8 different points, like 8 different examples of him getting a percentage. Like on Tuesday, he got 60%, and on Wednesday, he got 70%. Like I would need 8 of those for each target. So the math can boggle your mind. And I have a little illustration that makes me laugh. Are you taking any foreign language classes this year? Yes, math. So I have a resource for you in this link. It was the data sheet that I made last year to try to get 8 data points per target skill before the next progress notes were due. And like I said, for this kid, it was impossible, but I'm hoping that that'll help you kind of visualize and organize your data collection if it fits in this kind of trial data format. I saw somebody raise their hand, but I'm gonna keep going because I don't want to run out of time for questions. Oh, and by the way, it is 6 of. I can stay on late. You probably can't, so I apologize. So consideration number 7, if they're nonverbal, you need to think about, this came from my last session that I did. What are they already doing non-verbally? So they're not using language, they're not using like a symbolic form of language of communication, but it's still very intentional and it's a pattern and they've learned it that it works. So they're doing it because they know it works to get people to listen to them. These are skills the student already has. We just need to shape it into using language. So we need to figure out the function of the behavior. It's all fun and games till someone figures out the function of your behavior. So look for patterns of behavior that are meaningful. If the one-to-one says, oh, he's going to the door because he wants to go for a walk, that's what we should be teaching him to say, that he wants to go for a walk. Like we don't have to teach him a whole new skill. You just need to teach him to do it in a different way. So the key is to honor that nonverbal communication first by letting them get what they want, then modeling the new language that goes with it, which is go or for a walk or whatever you pick as your target. So these are some examples of how I would write those goals. I would use the terms using symbolic language. I would list out the different types of symbolic language. And these are some objectives that I would use to get to that goal. So start out really basic, initiation through behavior. So they're eloping, they're grabbing, they're leading, and that they will visually attend to the SGD while it's being modeled. Okay, so that's step one. They're doing the behavior. We know what it means. So the adult with them is now modeling the language that goes with it, and all the student needs to do is visually attend. That's your data point. Then objective number 2 is that they would use the talker during a routine. So it's very routine. Every time we go to the door, I'm expected to use my talker to say, let's go for a walk. And then that gets to the overarching goal, which is to do it spontaneously outside of a routine. So it's more flexible. So you're kind of like getting harder and harder as you go. My consideration about operational is that I think that you should use it in an objective, because it could be step 1 is that they should carry their talker, but it can't be the overall goal is that they should carry their talker. That would be like saying they should go get a calculator instead of using it to solve a math problem. They should be using their talker to communicate. Just carrying it around is not a communication goal, in my opinion. Hope that makes sense. And then another consideration is generalization. Many of our learners do get stuck in a routine. So we need to make sure we're varying by location, by the person they're communicating with, especially having them communicate with peers. I think that's a piece that people forget a lot of times. So even in your goal, you could say, given frequent modeling with people, including peers, yada, yada, yada. And to add the generalization piece at the end of the goal, you could say from or with at least 3 different adults and peers across at least 3 different settings. So you're building in the variety right into the way the goal is written. Okay, this one is about answering social questions, and she's asking them in different ways. So she's not just saying, what's your address, what's your address, what's your address? She's asking, where do you live? What would you tell someone who said, where do you live? She's asking the question in lots of different ways. So again, it's keeping the learner flexible in how to answer the question. So we're going to skip this. Consideration number 10, the 6th competency, use target power words, self-advocacy words, the language of feelings, emotions. That kind of gets back to what Kate Ahern was saying, like we need to make sure we don't forget about these for the students that it would make sense for. And then lastly, I just want to talk quickly about using AI, because I know it's a hot topic right now. There's a website called AI for Education that actually gives you a template for what to write into the AI, like ChatGPT is one AI that you can get for free. But AI for Education actually gives you the wording so that it can come out with an IEP goal for you. So this is what I did. I turned their template into into an example of like how to teach a kid how to say my turn. And then this is what the ChatGPT gave me back. So you can read through it on your own, but you'll see it has a lot of mistakes. So my takeaway with AI is it's like a great rough draft to get you started and give you some momentum and feel like you're saving time, but then you obviously have to edit. I thought it was cool that it gave me like 5 objectives. I didn't even tell it to do that. And it also gave me a little blurb about progress monitoring. So yeah, there's another one besides ChatGPT that's called Magic School that a lot of people really love. It's also free with email sign up, but I love how they give you all these warnings at the beginning, like check for bias and accuracy, use AI for initial work, but make sure to add your final touch. Your judgment matters. AI's knowledge stops at 2021, so be aware when dealing with recent topics. And then protect privacy. Don't ever put a student's name or any kind of identifying information into the AI chatbot or whatever you want to call it. I just had one more video about, this is a perfect example of like, it's hitting all the considerations that we talked about. It's basically, she's doing a math worksheet that's really high level math, multiplication, like 9 times 7. And she's using a calculator, and then she's going on her talker and she's saying 56. So she's stating a total. So there's no like, I'm just labeling, I'm just matching something. There's no symbols that she could be, like doing a different task when we thought she was doing math. She's really doing math. It's authentic. She's demonstrating her intelligence. And again, this is all being done with a special ed teacher. So I had an activity for you to try to use AI to write a SMART goal and objectives for that particular activity, but we don't have time for that. I just have one more page of resources because there was not enough time to squeeze it all in. But these are some really awesome resources about how to like look at the goals you already have and like rate them. So like one of them is a rubric rating scale. And these are my references. Okay, we are 2 minutes over, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to questions. So I'm gonna look at the Q&A. For multiple clients or per client and only on their device. Scarlett, I think only the second half of your question got into the Q&A. So if you could type that in again. Alyssa, how can we ensure autonomy when we have a goal that they will generate a phrase or sentence with a certain number of words and they choose not to respond or use another modality? I feel like this encourages our teachers, peers, and parents to require a certain response in order to show progress on their goal. That is a very good question. If they choose not to respond, I might honor that and then model a way to say that they don't want to respond. So it's still an opportunity to say something with 2 words or 3 words, but it's to say what they want to say, which is, I need a break, or I don't like this, or I'm bored. Using another modality, I think I answered that question. That should be embedded in the goal that they can use speech or sign. I don't think a gesture could possibly communicate as much as a 3-word sentence. So I'd have to hear like an example of what they're supposed to be generating and whether a gesture could count as meeting the goal or not for that one. Scarlett, but you still have to buy the software even if you are using TD Snap software. No, for TD Snap, their data collection is built in. It's not a separate service. Good question. As in the data collection software, just writing these questions. Oh, okay. Kara, any idea how to get our district to purchase these programs for AAC data collecting? Our district to provide minimal AAC support. Okay, the DAG3 is free. The communication matrix is free, unless you want to save more than 5, but I'd consider that free. I think just go with the DAG3 if your district won't pay for anything, because the DAG3 is very comprehensive. Would you suggest having criteria say independently instead of with any type of prompt or cue, and then documenting progress reports if a prompt or cue is needed? Yes, Kara, I like that idea. So yeah, writing the word independently in the goal or objective. And then when you're reporting progress, you say, if it wasn't independent, you say what type of support you needed to use. Great. Natalie, I work in outpatient peds with autistic learners. Would use the DAG3 as part of AAC evaluation, speech language evaluation, or for diagnostic treatment once it is decided the learner need to have an SGD? Or is it appropriate to use DAG3 in any of these? I think any of these. I personally haven't used the DAG3. I use the AAC profile, and it's usually after they already have a talker, because it's asking you, like, is the talker nearby? Do they orient their body to the talker? So if they don't have a talker, you're not going to be able to answer those questions. But sometimes you do an eval when they already have a talker to figure out if it's the right one. So you could use it in those situations. But if they have nothing, then no, you'd use other tools like the TAFs, the test of aided communication symbol performance, and other tools like that. How does an AAC user complete an IQ test or other evaluations if the moderator or student are still learning how to use the device? You probably need the student to be more independent, be at those higher levels of the assessments we talked about, in order for them to complete an IQ test. But if the only way a student can communicate a label is using their device, how is this not considered labeling? How else do they, okay, so it's labeling if they don't see the thing they're labeling. So sometimes you might say like, what animal says woof, woof? And they would answer like a dog. But if you show them a picture of a dog, then they can just look for the picture on their talker that looks like that thing. Does that make sense? So if it's an auditory cue without a visual, or like if you're holding up a lock and you say like, what goes with a lock? And the answer is a key, then they didn't see the key. It's just, you can't be holding up a visual if you want them to be labeling. The DAG3 uses the term select access method frequently. Do you know what that's referring to? Access method is like whether they're using eye gaze, whether they're using touch, whether they're using switch access. So if they're touching the screen with their finger, you're going to say direct select with touch. I've recommended operational goals for the special education teacher for adaptive. Oh, I like that. Yeah, because it's not a communication goal, but you're right. It's like a daily living goal. Like, did I remember to bring it with me when I left the room? So yeah, I like how you have operational goals under special education for adaptive. That's great. Can you elaborate on POD? Okay, POD is pragmatic organization of dynamic display. It's another opt-in for organizing vocabulary. It's in a grid, but it's organized by pragmatic intent. Like, so it's for kids who understand that if they want to ask a question, they start with the button that says, I'm asking you a question. And then that leads down to more specific parts of what they're trying to say. But you kind of like your first step is to give context of what you're trying to say. So it was designed for kids with cerebral palsy who had average to above average intelligence and social skills. We have AT specialists telling us we can't model on the student's device and to use another device to model. Thoughts, research. So the only time that I think you cannot model on the student's device is if the student gets upset by it and it's then killing the interaction. So I'm not sure why they would tell you couldn't on the student's device if that wasn't happening. If the student is happy to share, then it'd save you a lot of money. That they must be buying like a second device every time a kid has a device. That doesn't seem realistic to me, but I don't know any research to support or refute, so I apologize. It was for the data collection. Do these subscriptions, like the one for $5 a year, is it for any device and any amount of students you have? So the one that was $10 a year called Realize Language is only for Touch Chat and LAMP, and it's for unlimited number of students. The one that was $5 for each additional saving of the data, that was called AAC Communication Matrix. That one is asking you questions about the student, so it's not specific to their communication device. It could even be used for kids who aren't using high-tech AAC. So Communication Matrix is very flexible. So on the data collection, can the parents as well view on TD Snap? I don't know. You'll have to ask about TD Snap, possibly on their website or email or call your rep. I'm sorry about that. Thoughts on using AAC and DTI? I've heard mixed things that it should not be a demand that they use their AAC to answer questions and should be able to point to pictures, etc. For example, the child is asked who his teacher is, and the staff has hidden buttons, pictures of his family on his people folder to allow less options for the child to answer the question. This is a super controversial topic in the field of AAC right now. The videos that I tried to show you were kind of in a DTI format, where there was a really prescribed way of asking, and it could feel like quizzing or testing. And that's where we get into compliance again and not allowing the student to be autonomous and not really having a genuine interaction. But I do understand that some learners learn best in that format. So I still help teams to incorporate use of the talker into DTI lessons. And I always tell them if they spontaneously use their talker to say they need a break or they want to take a nap, like that student that I showed in the video, she knows that she could at any point say she wants to take a nap and they will honor that and she will go lay on a mat. So I think there needs to be a balance, but that is a very tricky, I think it's each team has to kind of talk it through and include the parents on the team about whether this is appropriate, what we're doing with the student. Do you know if Proloquo to Go has an internal data collection tool? They have history. So it shows you a certain number of days back. So you'd have to make sure that you're recording what's in the history every few days because it will disappear if you go back maybe like 2 weeks or something like that. So you'd have to check on that. But it basically timestamps each separate message. So every time you hit the message display bar at the top, that counts as a message. And so it just makes a list of all those different messages by time. Can you go back to the true false slide and review those again? Okay. You should target a skill that your learner has already demonstrated to be emerging. True, because we're not building off of nothing. When the baseline is 0, it's really hard versus if the baseline is some of the time, because if they're doing it some of the time, then we know there's a natural tendency to already do it, and we just need to refine those skills. So I think you're going to see a lot more progress with that. Operational skills such as navigating folders should have their own goals. I'm saying false because that's not communication. Just navigating through folders isn't communication. But somebody shared that they're putting those goals into a different section outside of communication in the IEP. They're putting it into academic. So you could think about doing it that way. I do think an operational skill could be an objective because it could be like the first step to using the talker to communicate. Goals should focus on successful communication, even if that's without using the AAC device. 99% said true, so I think you all get that. Better for you to ask your learner questions that have no wrong answers, such as what do you want? This gets back to autonomous communication and like just letting the child have fun communicating and you're giving them feedback and everything's positive. There's no correcting. There's no making them feel bad that they did it wrong. So we're going to say true for that one. Number 4, your learner can repair a communication breakdown without being aware of the breakdown. This was a 50-50 split, I believe. I think it's false. I think they need to be aware. So they need to learn to look for a signal from their communication partner, like a confused facial expression, or if the communication partner says, huh, or what, I think that can bring a more obvious awareness to the student, but the student might need to be taught to look for those things and to react to those things differently than they normally would. They might have normally just ignored it. So I think they need to be taught sometimes to be aware of it, so that then the next step is, okay, now I'm aware there's a problem. how do I fix the problem? I could repeat it. I could rephrase it. I could say it slower. I could use my talker, etc. Follow up on auditory cue without a visual versus labeling. Is this not a higher level skill such as object function association? Should there just be no labeling goals in AAC IEP? Thank you. It's hard to write labeling goals because the visual gives it away. It's like a clue. It's like they're not doing it independently. It's like they're looking at a non-identical cue of what they should say with their talker. If you think about it that way. If there's no visual, then it's possible. Like, tell me some things that you see at the beach, and there's no picture being shown to them. They're just saying it off the top of their head. That would be fine. Have you written goals for consultation like teaching communication partners aided modeling strategies? No, so the IEP is what the student is supposed to be doing. So the IEP should not have goals about what everybody else should be doing. But like I gave some examples, the goal could be that the student is paying attention to the person who's modeling, or responding to the person who's modeling, so that you're measuring that the student is aware of the modeling or engaging with the modeling. But you can't make an IEP goal about like what the adults are doing. It has to be what the student is doing. So what's their behavior or response? Any tips for educators who say their student just stims on the device? I have a student who loves to say watch PBS Kids over and over, and the staff have been taking the device away. I have tried telling them to treat it the same as they would a verbal. Yes, I agree. Right, so if the student was doing that verbally, they wouldn't cover the student's mouth. They wouldn't physically stop them from doing it. And when you're taking the talker away, you're physically stopping the student from doing it. What you could do is provide them something else that, if it's truly a stim and they're like auditory, like with auditory or visual stimulation, and they need that, then just taking the talker away isn't meeting the student's needs, right? We need to give them something else that they can do it on, like an iPad, because maybe they like the auditory, so maybe a toy, maybe like a little voice recorded, even like a Big Mac switch that has a recording of the talker saying watch PBS Kids, so they can hit their Big Mac as much as they want, but they can't do it on their talker. So you're teaching them a replacement, so that they can still get what they need out of that auditory stimulation, but they're just not doing it on their talker. Because if they're using their talker to stim, then they can't use it to communicate. So just the same way, if they're using their talker to watch YouTube, they can't use it to communicate, and nobody else can model. So we need to be doing everything else on a separate device. I hope that answers your question. What does your conversations with educators in the classroom look like when you want to encourage them to go beyond help and more? I feel a little stuck in this aspect. Yeah, a lot of people are stuck in that. I would make sure that they're observing what the student actually enjoys, get to know the student more, and make sure that those things are in the device. I kind of talked about this in the last session, technically speaking. What is the student already communicating non-verbally? And start teaching those skills, to be using language to get those things done instead of just nonverbal behavior. Because I feel like it'll be more customized to the student, whereas like help and more are just really safe targets to give to every student because they're very functional, but they might not be very motivating because they're not really what the student is interested in. For students that are Gestalt language processors, can it be appropriate to have programmed phrases such as "I need a break" in his AAC rather than just pressing each button individually or just the break button? Yes, this is another hot topic in AAC right now. At ASHA this year, my colleague said she went to like 4 different sessions on Gestalt and AAC, and they all said different things. So I think we haven't come to a consensus yet, but a safe bet would be to have a mix of both so that you're hedging your bets. You have full sentences and you have single words. You have recordings of, you know, SpongeBob saying the thing that the kid loves to say, but you also have core words. Like, I think you should just have everything and have everybody model everything, and follow the student's lead. What do they prefer? Because that gets back to autonomous communication. What does the student want to say and how do they want to say it? Scarlett just said she has the same repetitive phrase from one of her students, so watch PBS Kids is very popular. Awesome. Pamela says, too funny. I love the idea of using a Big Mac as another way of getting that auditory input. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Pamela. All right, that was the last question. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop talking.
All right. Thank you, Anne, for another fantastic presentation. And thank you for staying this extra 23 minutes to answer questions. I know everybody's appreciative.
You're welcome.
For anybody that is still with us, please be sure to complete that assessment if you do want ASHA CEUs for this session. If you have any questions or you need any support, you can email ableu@ablenetinc.com. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and have a great day.
Thank you.